the really good creatives will do those things, right? But and they go looking for the other inspiration, because it's the blend of those two things. I used to actually like where in San Francisco, a lot of the agencies are in the financial district. But the cool thing about financial district is you go outside and there's people in suits who are trading stocks or whatever it is they do, right? You could also go, you turn left and you're in Chinatown. You go right, you're in North Beach, Italian neighborhood. You go straight down, there's the docks. There's a really wonderful gourmet section that's happening. So like, think of your idea, go for a walk. But go for a walk into a place that's going to take you through it. Like in that, what you could, in that 45 minutes, you can weave through all of those and just let all of those things happen. And somehow you're going to see something that's going to unlock that new idea. But you got to start with that idea. You got to walk, you got to have the base and then let yourself be knocked off of it.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples, not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz, real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
I remember sitting next to someone in a conference, eating lunch, making small talk, and it came up that his brand has no competition. And I said, wow, what a dream position to be in. I was used to working with a competitive sales office, hyper-focused on differentiating from competitors, us versus them. He said, no, you got it all wrong. It's not a dream position. It's horrible. When you have competition, you're going to get into a set amount of RFPs or bakeoffs. You're going to win a certain percentage of them. When you have competition, there's a line item in the budget to choose some vendor. You'll get a certain percentage of those. We need to start from ground zero and tell them why they should even care about this category. We really need to be creative. I remember that story when I was reading a recent podcast guest application, and this lesson really grabbed my eye. Creativity matters for a category of one. So now we're about to talk to someone in a similar position who's worked at a company that doesn't have competition. Here to share lessons behind that story, along with many more lesson-filled stories, is Gary Stein, the CMO of Virtuo. Thanks for joining us, Gary.
Thank you for having me, Daniel. I'm really happy to be here.
Now, of course, that's just your most recent company, your most recent lesson, just cherry picking through your background. So people know who I'm talking to. You've been a senior analyst at Jupiter Research, an instructor at San Francisco State University, an SVP of Strategy and Planning at iCrossing. As I mentioned, for the past year, you've been CMO of Virtuo. Virtuo has raised $7 million in Canadian dollars to date, with the latest round led by ATB Private Equity and Telus Ventures. And Gary manages a team of 10, including agencies. He manages them remotely, and he says they're a team that punch above their weight. So Gary, give us a sense, what is your day like as CMO, and how do you get your team to punch above your weight?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we don't do much punching. We do more hugging than punching is the way we like to go about it. But hug above your weight is weird. Okay, so my day, yes, I am. I'm actually a bit hybrid in terms of remote. I split my time between San Francisco, California, and Calgary, which is where the company is headquartered. So it doesn't matter where I am. My day starts every morning here. If it's on the West Coast, it's 7:52. In Calgary Mountain Time, it's 8:52. We have an all-hands 8-minute meeting, which I am going to say, if they have any bits of advice to give, have an 8-minute meeting every morning. What we do is just do a quick roundtable of what's on the plate for the day, go through a couple initiatives. We look at a dashboard to just look at our key metrics. And then we specifically read out a customer comment. So someone who uses our service, who has given us a comment, we read that out loud, at least one of them, maybe one or two. And it just brings the customer, the human being on the other end of this, into the room. And it does it every single morning. And I find it incredibly valuable. So we all share that moment. Then the next thing I do, I get the strongest espresso I can find, and then gulp that down, and then usually do a review of a metric of some kind, dive into a dashboard. Sometimes it's very high level. We're looking at revenue or prospects or things that are in our funnel, or how many visits we get to a website or an open rate. Pretty much the next thing is, how are we doing? Of course, we're setting quarterly metrics and tracking them very closely. So looking at some bit of data, some real thing that happens. And then after that, the startup, we're a startup with a lot of traction. We're a mid-sized startup, so it goes into, pure chaos. Or sometimes I'm hopping in with the CEO and we're talking about, an event that we're doing or a campaign. I'm often on the phone with our agencies, briefing them, getting them thinking about our goals and where we want to go. And then a lot of my day, and this might be my favorite part, is making stuff. I tend to do a lot of writing. I love working closely. This is probably what's kept me in marketing and advertising my career, is working closely with creative people to get feedback and to give direction and think about whether something exactly is on the brief. And a lot of the copy that gets written, I have some hand in, just because I'm a better writer than I am an artist. And then somehow have like a check-in at the end of the day with the team and call it quits. And when we're in Canada, there's lots of hockey and beers, and here in San Francisco, there's lots of hockey and baseball. Or sorry, baseball and beers. The consistent thing is the beers.
I like that. So why 8 minutes? Why 8 minutes? It sounds like you're getting a lot done in those 8 minutes too.
Yeah, totally. You know what? This predates me. I don't know if I've ever asked that question. Why it's 8 minutes? It feels like it's just the right amount. It kind of makes me think of, when we all got excited about 6-second videos, which I think was 7 seconds was fine. It was a 7-second video. And they said, it's short enough that that there isn't very much of a commitment. Like you can watch 7 seconds. Like who cares? It's just 7 seconds, but it's long enough to tell the story. And I think 8 minutes is in that sweet spot. Like I'm not going to skip an 8-minute meeting, and I have enough time to tell a story.
Okay, perfect. And I love how you read some direct customer feedback. So I like how you said about making things, right? That is what this whole podcast is about. Why I called it How I Made It in Marketing, because we get to make things as marketers. I've never been an actuary or podiatrist or anything else, but I don't feel like they get to make things. So, so let's look at your first lesson from making something. I mentioned it in the open. Creativity matters for a category of one. So tell us why you're a category of one, how you're a category of one, your company, and how you've used creativity to communicate.
Yeah, no. So I think we're a category of one, and I like your story in the opening about not having a competition. I mean, there's companies that do things that are similar to us, but when I joined, and I've been full-time with Virtuo for about a year, a third or so, but I've known the founders actually since they had just two dudes who had a bit of an idea, and I got to know them a couple of years back, and I've been an advisor all the way through. And that was my first question. I was like, well, who else is doing this? And not really anybody. So that puts us into this category of one, because it's not like someone is out there looking specifically for our service. And just to give you a quick sense of what it is that we do, we help people move into their new homes. And there's a much bigger story than that. But you buy a home, you're extremely excited, and then you do the worst thing in the whole world, which is move all your stuff from one place to another and get your utilities and insurance and all kinds of things. We just help with all of that with an app and a concierge team, and just make it go super smoothly. So that's a bit of a new thing, and people don't necessarily know that they're doing that. And we sell to companies that, a bunch of different kinds of companies, but companies that build houses and build communities is kind of a primary customer for us. Okay, so we solve a really strong problem, which is that moving is terrible, and people have described it as the worst part about buying a new home, the worst part of the best experience. We solve that problem. The companies that we're selling to, they don't necessarily think about that, although they're aware of that problem, and they may not necessarily know that there's a solution for it. However, what they are clearly aware of, acutely, strongly driven by, is they got to provide a great customer experience. This is, and you think about people who are buying homes right now, this is the generation that their partner on Tinder and have their lunch delivered by DoorDash and are a little bit frustrated that their Uber is 2 minutes late, right? Like that's, and they're bringing all of that. Salesforce has a really wonderful statistic that tells you that expectations set in one category get carried over to another category. They show up to buy a home with that same mindset. So what we have to do, if we went out there and did a pitch and we said, hey, we're a move concierge service, or we're a home concierge service, it's not clear that everybody's like, well, I'm looking for that. I don't know. Budget line item. So we got to find a way to make a connection around that. And so this is the story that we talked about. And this is something that I picked up through my years is let's position what we're doing associated with what they already care about. But because we're not exactly the answer, it's not like I need 2x4s and I give you 2x4s. We got to compellingly communicate that. So we got to put a creative wrapper around that message, because the first thing we have to do with someone, and I think this is category of 1 or category of 100, you got to get people engaged, and you got to get them a little bit uncomfortable with what they're doing right now. Like, maybe my shoes are not, I can't run fast enough in my shoes. It's got to be a little bit of discomfort that people want to go after, they want to solve. And so what we were able to do is make people a little uncomfortable. I say uncomfortable. I don't mean that in a bad way. I don't want to cause pain. I don't want to make them stressed or something like that. Just like, I could be better. And so how do we say that? We wrap that in a creative package. And then people are attracted by the creativity and then they get to the rest of the message. So that creative wrapper, always remembering to do that, especially if we're in a category of 1, but I think no matter what.
And so you mentioned that you used AI to help design the images for the campaigns. And I wonder if you learned anything from using AI to do that. And I ask partly because what you're talking about reminds me a lot of the Hollywood pitch, right? When there's a new movie coming out, when they're pitching that movie, It's like, it's like that thing and like Star Wars, but it's in the medieval times or whatever it is, right? It's like taking something that was successful. And so hearing you say that, that's kind of how AI works in some way. Some of the generative AI or design AI is saying, hey, I want something like this, but do it here. And the AI has something to relate to. So tell us a bit about using the AI to design those images and how it like kind of tapped into what you were looking to tap into, but brought something new as well.
Yeah, this is when we, punch/hug above our weight. I'll give a shout out to the agency we work with, Agency SOS. They're excellent. So the idea, how do we make people quote unquote uncomfortable, not in pain or stress, but uncomfortable, was what we offer is a part of a modern experience, right? Sort of like you said with Uber or Salesforce, whatever it might be, it's a modern way of doing business. So rather than say be modern, what we decided to say was don't get stuck in the past. And that was the compelling line of the message that pulled all the way through. And so how do you communicate to a builder that they shouldn't get stuck in the past? Well, we look at how they used to design homes. And so we created a series of images of interiors that were very clearly dated. So think of kitchens with avocado colored cabinets and living rooms with lots of paneling and fake rock and discussion pits. And, bedrooms that are in these sort of 1980s color schemes, seafoam, right? There's a lot of seafoam in our childhood. So what we were like, oh, that's so great because these images are so compelling and they're also sort of cool looking and they're fun to look at, but they're really clearly dated. And so we couldn't find any of those images. The agency we work with had an art director, a really talented art director, create the prompts. And honestly, I don't know what the prompts were that went into, I'm not sure what platform it was that they used, but they were clearly well crafted. And we even actually were just messing around. We tried to do it ourselves and they did not come back as well. So what we were able to do, what the art director was able to do was to put, first of all, our brand colors in certain key aspects, certain key lighting, because we there are pictures of kitchens from the 1970s that exist out there on the internet, but they're taken yesterday and everything looks kind of grungy and terrible. We didn't want that. We wanted it to be cool looking. So we got like 40 images. They were extraordinary. And so then we were able to create an ad that said, your kitchens don't look like this. And again, targeted at these builders, your kitchens don't look like this anymore. How about your customer experience? How about the modern experience? And then we get to a chance to make that pitch. So the creative idea, so the desire to make people feel a little bit uncomfortable, wrapping it in a creative idea. And also the kitchen, like these images are fun to look at and we all sort of love them. And it could be a little bit quirky and it had like a disco soundtrack behind it. The humor and the creativity and the fun and the richness of it, it just became compelling to look at. And I will say, once we hit on that idea, like let's all put it in the past, then you just keep on going, right? A good creative idea, it's meant to be a platform. So Yeah, we did the interiors. We did a conference where we created our booth look like it was a den from the 1970s with shag carpet and really ugly couches. I went on eBay and I bought a bunch of Good Housekeeping magazines from the 1970s, and we put our brand on them and scattered them all over the place. And then this was probably the best thing, is that this conference in particular, it's put on by a particular influential leader in our industry. And I looked at him, I said, well, he's kind of a certain age. And I was actually able to connect with his son, who gave me his graduation pictures from like 1975. And so I blew up his graduation picture and had it all over the place. And he's had an ad. And, the line that we used with, it was a picture of him, right? It was pretty noticeable. And it was, we did like a meme style. We said, sparking motivation since the Carter administration. And just like, once you've made that twist, just keep on going. And that's what the creative platform allowed us to do.
Wow, that is daring. Did he appreciate it, or was he like, what?
He loved it. And actually, I have a really great photo of him at the event holding up a framed picture, like a big blown up gold framed picture of him, just looking and going like, with the quirkies. He's got a great sense of humor and a great, he was willing to. That's the other thing. You have a really good creative idea. It's surprising how many other people want to play along with you that just amplify the idea.
Yeah. Well, that, back in my agency days, we'd call that legs, right? Well, that's an idea that has legs, right? Is it just a one-off, or does it have legs? And that's a great example of all the different extensions you're able to take with. So that was an example. You had to be creative because, as you said, you're a category of one. People don't know this thing. But just in general, this is the type of thing we do as marketers. Another lesson you have here is tell a compelling story that demonstrates the product. So how have you been able to demonstrate the product before?
Yeah, I'm definitely a bit of a classics, like an old school, Ogilvy used to talk about this, or Bill Bernbach, right? It's like, find something that's different about the product, and then compellingly communicate that. And there's a million examples all the way through that. Sometimes I think we get a little bit lost. Sometimes there's a compelling idea, but there isn't doesn't connect back to the product. There's lots of different ways it goes wrong. So there's two examples. And again, this is before Virtuo. When I was on the agency side, I was at an agency called 11 for a long stretch. And one of the products, or one of the brands we had, was Google Cloud. So Google Cloud, distinct from Google, it's the competitor to AWS, Amazon Web Services, business product. And this was a few years back, making sure that people understood, enterprises understood that the cloud is not just a place to store your data. You can actually do significantly advanced analytics on that data that can help drive your business. So it's a new idea, or an evolved idea that we wanted to communicate about your ability to do more with your data. And Chad Lights, who was the creative director at the time, he wrote the line, "Know what your data knows," which I just loved, right? Businesses create billions of terabytes of whatever of data. There's truth that's inside of there, but you don't know what it is. Your data knows what it is. Okay, so what we did with them, with Google Cloud, and this is probably the most complicated thing I've ever done, is it was a partnership between Google and the NCAA. And during the Final Four, the basketball tournament, obviously the March Madness, during the Final Four, during both of the games, we ingested Google Cloud. The data scientists of Google Cloud ingested something like 60 years worth of basketball data, of games from NCAA games, and then captured data from the first half. During halftime, we generated a prediction about what was going to happen on the second half, built an ad out of that, and aired that ad right before the second half started. And we did that on both Final Four games, and then on the national championship on the Monday after that. And it was an extraordinarily complicated. It was so well timed and so well executed. And ultimately what we were doing is we were communicating that it's that idea. It doesn't just store your data. You can actually perform analytics and make a prediction about what's going to happen in the future. And by the way, our predictions about what was going to happen in the second half all happened. They were all totally dead on and right. So rather than just tell people that, we turned the camera around and showed us doing it, showed the product doing it, and made it more fun, and even kind of we took on some risk, right? It's possible that what we said and broadcast on national television wasn't going to happen. We didn't know. But we went ahead and broadcast it, and then it gave us this follow-up moment where we were able to say, hey, look, it happened. See? Use Google Cloud. And again, it's like, that's a really compelling story, and it's on a high wire act. And people like watching high wire acts, right? And so put yourself up on that high wire, do something remarkable, but make sure that it shows this thing that you, like at the end of it, it's like, I'm okay if they forget that we did it on the Final Four and they forget what the prediction actually was. As long as they remember, it's like, oh my God, they were able to use the technology that, like, the product feature comes along with that story.
So how do you do that though? So, those are one of the ideas that it sounds good in theory, but if I was at the agency with you, it'd be like, we have like 10 minutes to produce a national spot. Like how does it even work? That's the thing with agency people. There's a lot of good ideas, but actually executing and making them happen.
Yeah. I will tell you that it was in San Antonio that year. And outside of the stadium was a semi trailer, like whatever, 18-wheeler, but inside was a studio. And inside of that studio was a team of creatives and data scientists and brand people and legal people and network people and a significant amount of technology. And I'll tell you the way that we did it. Did you ever see The Founder? That show, or the movie about McDonald's, about the guy who didn't start McDonald's but kind of made it big?
I know the movie you're talking about. I haven't seen it though. Yeah.
Okay, you guys see this movie. We should pause the podcast and watch that movie. It's such a good movie, right? One of the things that they show before they open the first McDonald's, or the whole thing is they franchise it. The first big McDonald's is they go to a parking lot and they tape out because it's like, we have to turn good quality food quickly. They tape out all of the stations and they practice and they practice and they practice and they practice. So the cool thing about that tournament is that it goes on for like a month before the Final Four. We practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced. And then when we were sick of practicing, we practiced 16 more times and we made everything just right. And the thing that it was most like, I got to say, it was like, you watch like a NASA documentary and they're all in the control room. It was like that. And it was down to the way in which somebody said something was planned. And that person had to say that in that exact way. Otherwise, we would not take the next step forward. So it can't there's no ad-libbing. It's practice, 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 discipline all the way through. And this is another thing, actually, I didn't talk about it. Courtney Bupert, who was the head of 11, used to talk about take big risks that are safe. It looks to everybody else like we're on a high wire act. We've done it so many times that we're dialed in on that one. So it just, taking risks is a good thing. So it was a significant amount of coordination from a lot of very talented people.
And adrenaline, I would think, working late at night to get that pitch ready for the next day is one thing, but doing it in real time, the adrenaline must have been through the roof for you.
Through the roof. It was extraordinary.
All right, here's another example I like. As I said, tell a compelling story that demonstrates the product. So if you've got a physical good, here's a great example for a physical good. Tell us what you did for Pella.
Yeah, so Pella's really, this is another interesting sports story. So maybe there's some abilities on sports that are there. Pella is a window manufacturer, and they make beautiful windows in lots of different. One of the things that they do a significant amount of engineering on windows, right? We just think about a window as a window, but there's a lot that goes into it. They also are able to put that engineering into a lot of styles, which is important if you've got a traditional house, right? A Victorian or a colonial, and you want modern windows, but you want to match a particular style. So again, that's an idea, and it's especially important through the Midwest where there are hurricanes, because the problem
there are hurricanes in the Midwest.
Go figure, right? Aren't there?
Okay.
No, maybe not hurricanes. Tornadoes. Sorry, tornadoes.
Okay,
in the US.
I gotcha.
Hurricanes where you are. High winds.
There you go. High winds. Okay.
I'm in California. It's sunny and beautiful. 364 days a year.
You got some high weather, yeah.
We just have earthquakes, right? But anyway, so high winds, right? So the problem with high winds, of course, in windows is if your window shatters, like if a rock or something will go through your window, if there's high winds, your roof will rip off, right? Because the vacuum is, broken in it. And so it's incredibly important to have strong windows that can withstand shots, like sudden impacts, right? And you don't want it to look like it's some industrial, it's because it's your home and it's beautiful. And most of the time you want it to just look aesthetic. So windows that can withstand high impact and also look great. We want to communicate those two things. You can certainly put that in the headline, and you can, there's lots of clever ways that we can do that. One of the things we did is try to think about where are windows surprisingly affected by sudden impacts. And the Cubs stadium, is that Wrigley Field? That's Wrigley Field, right?
Wrigley Field,
doesn't sound right. Yeah, okay.
Wrigley.
Yeah, right, Wrigley Field. Over the left field wall is an apartment complex, because Wrigley is the only, well, I don't know if it's the only, but it is a stadium that is built in a neighborhood. And people, in fact, live there, and their windows face the stadium. And more than once, a home run has gone over the left field wall and shattered a window, right? So our pitch to Pella, and they loved this idea, and we went for it, this was amazing, is let's design a home run proof window, replace all of the windows on that apartment building with Pella windows, and make sure that no ball could ever shatter it. So they went for it. They actually designed a window, and there's a really great engineering video showing, the impact of a baseball that goes through. We replaced all of the windows. We put a promotion. If a ball ever bounced off of a window, we would donate some charity. Every time there was a home run, the whole place would light up with Pella. And then we did a batting practice where there was an attempt to hit the window. And again, we're trying to say, what we want to make sure people remember is that, and it's a historic building, so you can't just replace it with any window. You got to keep the historic look. Kept the historic look, massively upgraded them to be resistant to home runs. And by the way, this will also help if you're in a hurricane or a tornado.
What I love about those stories is our founder, Flint McLaughlin, has this great quote: "Don't make claims. Let people make their own conclusions. Lead people to conclusions," right? Because that's something we like to do as marketers. Yeah, you could have said, "These are great windows," big ad, oh, fantastic windows. Yeah. But you let people come to their own conclusions. They can see it for themselves. Another thing, like you mentioned, it just happens to be sports. I do think sports is one of those opportunities in our modern day where it's not scripted. You don't know what's going to happen. Unless you think it's rigged, right? It's not. It's every other entertainment type of thing out there. It's very scripted. You know what's going to happen, and so that is a great chance to say, "Hey, watch what happens live. Like, let's see what happens here. Let's see how this goes down." So,
totally, yeah. No, I mean, we want to leverage these things in culture, right? And there's a well-established theory that the reason why we like sports is that it provides spontaneity in our lives, right? I don't know when this is going to air, but I was pretty sure the 49ers were going to win the divisional the game, but I didn't know for sure. And it was an edge of your seat. That's a thrilling moment, right? Whereas if I watch, whatever, they said Star Wars meets Richard III, whatever new Hollywood movie, I know that that's scripted. So it provides those moments of spontaneity. So we'll lean in on those moments. Like, we don't know what's going to happen. Let's raise our stakes a little bit. And yeah, sports definitely is a good way for us to do that. It's a way for marketers to do it.
Absolutely. Hey, when the Jags were the number one seed in the AFC, I was pretty sure they would make the playoffs, and then they didn't. So you never know what's going to happen
until they don't. Totally, yeah.
Right. And that's a great example, actually, because I think when the Jags were the number one seed in the AFC, I think there was a 97% chance or something that they would make the playoffs, which brings us to the term of data. You say, get your data sorted, right? Data can make predictions. In the previous example, you're talking about Google Cloud. That's very public. But a lot of these things that happen in agencies, they happen behind the scenes. So to make these insights, get these good insights, a lot of things have to happen behind the scenes. And one of them is, as you say, getting your data sorted. So I think you had a challenge at an agency where it was taking far too long to get analytics, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is a compelling problem. And to be honest with you, I think this is one of the things, like, when we think about advertising and the future of advertising or what's holding advertising back, data is really an important one. And I think the more that agencies and marketers in general are comfortable with data and focus on it, the better. But I think advertising has a very specific data problem. And maybe this is true in other industries, but the industry I particularly know, which is we create these integrated campaigns because there's a consumer journey and saying, like, well, they're going to see the billboard and then they're going to go online and then they're going to listen to the radio and the TV. And all of those channels are doing a job. The Procter & Gamble thing, everything has a job to do. They all come together to create preference or desire or interest or whatever it might be. It's on paper, the strategy is integrated. And then often the creative is integrated as well, meaning each one of those pieces does the particular thing. Then it goes into the world and we play something on television and on YouTube and on Instagram and wherever else. And all of those platforms report data back totally differently. And we may take the same piece of creative, the same 30-second spot, and put it on 3 different platforms. They're all measuring impressions, and they're all measuring completed views. However, they're reporting them differently. And, an integrated plan might have 60, 70 channels on it. And each one could have 100 data points. Suddenly we go from our very clear, customer-centric, empathetic, driven strategy that's totally integrated to a scattered mess. Getting focused on pulling that back together into some sort of a cohesive view is critical. And we were saying, and you'll have to forgive me for not naming names on this one in particular, but we had a very complicated, or very complex media plan. And it was taking the same amount of time to generate results from that campaign in the modern age as it took for a letter to make its way from Missouri to Sacramento on the Pony Express. That's like 3 weeks. And I'm like, that's not okay. We can't allow that to occur because, first of all, either we're wasting money because we're spending on something that's not working, or we're missing an opportunity. I mean, there's a chance that we just nailed it. It's all right. We've got to get more nimble with that data. And there's 2 choices. Either you just put everything on YouTube and you're just cool. Like, that's all we're going to do. Or you find a way to organize that data on the back end of it. And so there's a handful of companies that'll help you do that from a technology perspective. It's really a service offering. And I think even the most creative driven agencies can benefit massively from recognizing that in order for us to be consumer centric and always being focused on delivering for the customer and an integrated plan that uses every channel, you got to invest in that back end data, and getting data sorted is something that is going to continually be a challenge. It's going to hold advertising back. You just can't be as nimble, and you can't be as bold unless you have the data under control. You know how well things are working.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the Pony Express is a great example of telling a compelling story to move something, even internally. So I like that. But I don't want to get too deep here, but give us a sense, like, what did you do to ensure there was a consistent process for both timely delivery and reliable data interpretation? So, for example, for us, we've shared a free data pattern analysis tool before, right, to help bring that consistency. So, because at the end of the day, what you want to do with data is you want to find a meaningful pattern. That's the whole point of the data, right? If you want to just give us a high level, like, how did you make sure that you reduce the fragmentation, the inefficiency? Like, is there something we can learn from there?
Yeah, probably the most important thing is to develop a data strategy. Start with a data strategy. It's something that I don't know that a lot of media agencies are doing. Some media agencies are better at it than others. But a data strategy says, this is the data we need to gather, and this is the way in which we're going to gather it. And it's incredibly important if you are using sort of the client side, if there are multiple agencies, like, for example, if you've got a broadcast as well as a digital, as well as maybe a demand gen or possibly influencer or social, making sure that they all adhere to a data strategy that can be just as simple to begin with as a naming convention. It's shocking how naming conventions are not always paid attention to, and the value that they can generate, just in terms of making sure that even like I said, there might be one piece of creative that's placed by 3 different agencies, making sure they all call that creative the same thing, small thing, but it's a huge element for it, right? And then coming up with some definitions. So, for example, different platforms will call completed videos they'll call it a completed video, a full view at a different point. Someone may say, 70% is a completed view. Others might say 80% is a completed view. You need to correct for those discrepancies so that you have some clarity along the lines. Then the other thing is you have to invest in some sort of a platform that's going to gather that data and clean it. These are usually called ETLs, extract, transform, and load technologies that'll go into each one of these platforms and pull it all together, correct it in the way that it makes sense. And then this is a lesson I learned doing that Final Four project. It shouldn't sit on someone's hard drive. It needs to go up into a cloud. It has to go to Google Cloud, put it in BigQuery or in AWS or Snowflake or wherever it might be. And then once it's there, like once the data is clean and it's there, you can start hiring people who know how to write machine learning or artificial intelligence. There are, low code, right? It always makes sense. And again, this is beyond my technical ability, but I just know that you can then go to someone who knows how to write a machine learning algorithm and say, can you run it on this data set? And then that data set is available. And then you don't just say, analytics is good when it tells you what happened. It's amazing when it can tell you what you're allowed to do. Getting to that what you're allowed to do is only available if your data's set and sorted, and you're able to run some analysis on it. Then again, the whole point of this, agencies want to be bold. Advertising, it's high wire acts, but there has to be high wire acts that you feel confident about. Analytics can help you be bold.
Well, and I think the other thing it can do is help you serve a customer, right? So we started this episode. Well, no, first we started this episode where you said, hey, in our 8-minute meeting, we only have 8 minutes. And in that 8 minutes, we read one or two things from the customer. That's a quarter of your meeting right there. So if you're talking about like trying to stay focused on the customer, I mean, that to me is one of the most exciting things about data. Let's actually put stuff out into the world, see how it works, learn from customers, and keep doing better, right?
For sure, right? And you think about the wonderful creative people that we get to work with. And I think you came up as a copywriter, right? I mean, you wanted to tell funnier jokes or more emotional line, like whatever that might be. If I don't know anything about the effectiveness of those, I'm going to have to say you got to just be run of the mill, just be mediocre. But if I can say, like, hey, tell a little bit of a funnier joke. Let's push it a little bit. And if I have the data to have it come back, and let's say it works, right? I can go back to you and say, be funnier, be funnier, be funnier, be funnier until it stops. And it's the biggest idea possible as opposed to what do we think is going to work. We're always seeking the biggest idea possible. And analytics allows us to do that. And the feedback loop means we can iterate and iterate and iterate. And when I finally find what the funniest idea, the biggest idea possible, the funniest joke we possibly tell, as a business leader, I would feel more comfortable saying, cool, let's do the Super Bowl spot on that. Let's buy the bill. Let's spend the money. Let's hire the actor, like whatever it might be, because my confidence has been raised. And you don't have to, or you creative don't have to stay safe, and you don't have to take a massive risk right away. We're going to iterate ourselves up to the highest. And this is a shout out to my boss, Casey, who's the CEO of Virtuo. He told me, and this is part of the reason why I took the job. He goes, our marketing or all of our advertising is either got to make people laugh or make them cry. And I'm like, I'm in. Let's do that. But I'm not going to guess what's going to make them laugh or cry right off the bat. I'm going to iterate. I'm going to work my way towards that.
Right. Well, so those are some stories from Gary that we learned about some of the things that he has made, whether they were public facing or like a data strategy, they were behind the scenes. But another great thing is we get to make things with people, as he said, creative people. We get to collaborate. In just a moment, we're going to hear some of the lessons Gary learned from people he collaborated with. But first, I should mention that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MECLabs Institute, the parent organization of Marketing Sherpa. You can get 10,000 marketing experiments working for you with a free trial of the MECLabs AI Guild at meclabs.com/AI. That's MECLABS.com/AI to get artificial intelligence working for you. All right, Gary, the first person that you bring up is Paul Kent, the founder of Mactivity. And you said from Paul, you learned, always ask, what can we do with this? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, okay, so I joined Mactivity. It was a small company. There was like 6 of us in an attic in Los Gatos, California. And I was right out of college. And, I like to say I didn't have imposter syndrome. I was just an imposter. I had no idea what I was doing. And it was totally clear to everybody. But I was like, okay, I'm going to figure this out, right? I was just like reading all the time. I was reading like industry articles and business publications, just trying to get myself. And I got a master's degree in literature. I was not an MBA or anything like that. So I had a lot of catching up to do. And so I was constantly filling my head with all of this information. And I was like, okay, I know about this stuff. And I would talk to Paul, who's still a really close friend of mine. And he would always ask me, it's like, okay, what can we do with that? And I just really love that because, and now I'm reminded of it a lot as I'm in more of a startup, again, what mid-sized startup, but that world of just like, what can we do with this? How is this going to help us? And sometimes the answer is it just won't, which is just a thing that we know. But maybe it's like, oh, there's somebody who agrees with us. We should reach out and try to do something with them. Or can I provide some advice? Or is this a sales opportunity? Or is this a chance for us to say, we're not that, we're this? And so always kind of put it through that filter where it's not just enough to know, but you have to always put that lens on it. You always have to ask that question and say like, how does this help us? And the cool thing about that is like the only way that works is if you have a good sense of the mission of the company. And so the flip side of that is like, make sure everybody knows what we're trying to achieve. And I try to communicate that as much as possible so that everybody can like come along and just be like, oh, not only is that an interesting thing, but how does that help us? And I just really love that mentality, that mindset of it. It's very much a growth mindset.
So this is one I wanted to quibble with a bit. And I'll tell you my thoughts, and you can push back, especially as a guy who's been a writer, who's worked at an agency. I see where you're coming from, but I think this is sometimes our weakness because I know, for example, when you go into an industry, I was new into the software industry. I read eWeek magazine. I tried to read everything about that industry, and yes, I tried to have that hyper focus on okay, now how can I use that these software companies I'm working with? But I think we overlook then the true creativity because I think what true creativity comes from is making these disparate connections that don't necessarily make sense on the face of them. So one thing that I like to do, I also am a big reader. I like print. I like newspapers. I like magazines. I read a lot of this stuff. And I'm not always looking for that direct connection. I don't understand how this works. It goes into the brain and 3 weeks later, it comes out as some wacky, totally disparate idea. Yeah. And I think sometimes the only thing I'm cautious about when you say that, I think there's probably some good points in that. You want to know your industry well, you want to make those connections, but sometimes we get too myopic. And we only focus on the industry and we only focus on that immediate. Okay, here's this. I'm, in the home constructions industry. I'm focused on technology. Here's this. How do we use it right now? Versus let me get a wide array of knowledge, what's going on, what happened in history, what's going on in society, all these things. And then somehow that creative process down the road, I come up with something. So what do you think of that? Is that a fair pushback or am I way off base here?
No, you're wrong. I'm just kidding. Well, I think yes and. I'm going to yes and you. Is that a fair thing to do?
We'll do the improv,
right?
Yeah.
I think it's important to start from a base and then let yourself go anywhere. What I think where things tend to get a little bit confused, and I agree, sometimes there's a really good definition of creativity, which is two disparate ideas mashed together, right? Like Star Wars and love story or whatever it might be, like those two things mashed together create something brand new. What I think, and I think this is one of the things is like, oh, the old rules don't apply. It's often said by people who have no idea what the old rules are. They just want to make a change. And they want to say, oh, the home industry, we should market it like the fashion industry or something like that, right? I think if you don't know the home industry, you're at a disadvantage when you go looking for those other inspirations to come in. This is, again, I'll go back to 11 and Courtney, who ran that shop and did it so well. We had Virgin America, which, the airline, which, unfortunately isn't around anymore. But one of the core insights, and it wasn't mine, I'm giving full credit there, is marketing that airline the way, as though it were an entertainment brand. That was a really good insight that sparked a line of creativity that lasted many, many years and really differentiated that brand. The only way that worked is because there was a clear understanding of the airline industry and how the airline industry worked in order to take it a new direction. And so there's never anything wrong with filling lots of different things. The problems, I think, is if you just say, okay, well, now I know how to do this, and I'm going to do this thing in the right way, you'll do it in the right way, but there won't be anything breakthrough. To say, I'm going to take all of this stuff and something else, I'm going to mash it together. If that can spark something new, the best case scenario is when you have a really solid understanding. And this is when we're really impressed by people who get it, and they almost like, it seems like they know it, they know it, they forget it, and they create something new. Like that's the true mastery. And I think that the really good creatives will do those things, right? But and they go looking for the other inspiration, because it's the blend of those two things. I used to actually like where in San Francisco, a lot of the agencies are in the financial district. But the cool thing about the financial district is you go outside and there's people in suits who are trading stocks or whatever it is they do, right? You could also go, you turn left and you're in Chinatown. You go right, you're in North Beach, which is the Italian neighborhood. You go straight down, there's the docks. There's a really wonderful gourmet section that's happening. So like, think of your idea, go for a walk, but go for a walk into a place that's going to take you through it. Like in that, what you could, in an app, 45 minutes, you could weave through all of those and just let all of those things happen. And somehow you're going to see something that's going to unlock that new idea. But you got to start with that idea. You got to walk. You got to have the base, and then let yourself be knocked off of it.
Yeah, like the Picasso quote. I'm sure I'm gonna really mess it up, but something like learn like a student, break like a master, or something like that. Like learn the rules like a student, break them like a master, or something like that. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Yeah, Picasso could paint could paint like Michelangelo, but he painted like Picasso.
Right. Here's another one. Lesson we have is every click is a wish via Joel Hladček, Chief Creative Officer at Red Sky. What do you mean by that? Every click is a wish.
Yeah, so when I was looking at Red Sky, it was very much like the beginning of interactive, so we were trying to figure interactive out, interactive meaning, webs and websites and banners and all kinds of interesting things. Joel really had he had a really wonderful way about him that humanized and simplified. And that was one of his mantras. So, it's like click it is still work, and it worked then, it still works now. But I think it just was a simple reminder that when someone takes an action, you create something. This is how I made it, right? You make something, but you make something for someone and they take an action, whether it's to read your book or visit your site or walk in your store. It's not pure arbitrary action that's happening. They want something to occur. And we can say, well, what's the value proposition? What's the response? All sorts of things. We say every click is a wish. When someone clicks on a banner, which would, kind of the beginning, I think, of that quote, it's like they are wishing for something to return. There's value in what they're looking for, right? Even if this is download a coupon, right? There's just like, it says, that word wish, most often we hear it in, fairy tales and Disney. It's a magic word, right? It compels us to deliver magic, not just a response, but magic. And that framing always elevates the execution. And so every click is a wish, as opposed to every click is a desire or a need or something, or, wanting to satisfy. Wishes are special, and everybody has wishes. And when we think about it as a wish, and I think about it a lot with homes now, people are they're not buying buildings with bathrooms and bedrooms. They're building a place to read their kids a book as they fall asleep. That's the wish. And it just really reminds us that we have the opportunity. Maybe it's not the responsibility, but it's the opportunity to deliver something magic.
Yeah. And so how do we then on the front end properly set up the communication of what they could possibly get so they know they can make that wish or they want to make that wish? Because this is where I see a lot of websites fall or a lot of campaigns fall. Something as simple as a button that says submit, or, we forget that it's a wish. It's also a little risky. Like, what's going to happen on the other side of this? And I think really good marketing sets it up well of like, okay, here's the clear thing. You will take this action and then you will get this thing, hopefully. And then poor marketing is like, we're like, why are not more people converting? Well, it says submit. It's not clear what you're getting. They're worried that, your website's secure and all these things. So do you have any examples of that of like, okay, yes, it's a wish. I get we're coming from there. But then as communicators, how do we set it up so they know to make the right wish, or they want to make that wish and they know what's going to come on the other side of that click?
Yeah. I think there's two different things. One is, the other cool thing about every click is a wish is that you can leave the click alone in some sense. So let's say, for example, you want someone to fill out a form. what is the promise that we're giving them to fill out the form? I mean, I see a lot of download our white paper, which is compelling. And that's actually what you're going to do is download the white paper. But, the better ones are, deliver Q4 results or something that's more aspirational. And then that aspiration, you try to tap into their desire, and I suppose it's a little similar to how we opened up, right? Which is that they may not be looking for a download a white paper, but they're really looking to increase their customers' experience or, increase efficiency of their sales team or something like that. Like that's a thing that they really want. You're an instrument to get them to do that. So make sure that when we're promising them something, it's not download our white paper, it's make your team more efficient or, something that's better written and more compelling than that. The other thing, and this is the thing that I always think of, I hear Joel's voice in my head whenever this happens. If I do that, I click the submit button and it comes back with a blank page that says, form successfully captured. It's the reward. And even though you've already gotten it, and that's the whole thing is like, if all you're really focused on is the conversion, I just got to get that email address. You put all your effort into that. And then you're like, well, just give them the standard thank you page that comes with WordPress or whatever it might be. If you say every click is a wish, when you make that wish, you need magic. You need something to respond back. And so we would throw little bits of creativity in there, little bits of just like a surprising, beautiful execution or a sound or, game designers are so good at this, right? Is that action, especially if it's the first action, sets the tone of all the rest of the actions, all the rest of the interactions that the consumer is going to take with the brand. If it's simple, but wonderful, they're going to want another one. And then you can start merchandising the rest of the stuff that you're doing. So if that click is a wish, get the data, send them the white paper, but make that experience extraordinary in some memorable, compelling way. Do something magic in that moment because it's wish.
I like that. I mean, one way I like to think of things is every touch point is a thing of value, right? And I think that's what you're saying too. Like that was a touch point. That's a thing of value. That's an opportunity we have to either exceed their expectations or fall below their expectations, and they're going to judge us based on it and make, then that's going to how they're going to look at us for every other possible thing we could do, right? For that first small thing, right? Especially like download a white paper. Boy, if that's not fantastic, how are they going to spend like six figures on our enterprise software, right?
Right. And, I mean, we chase after touch points. They're scarce. These moments with the consumers paying attention to us on the brand. Why would we waste any of them? Any of them, no matter what it is, make it awesome, make it great. Don't get in people's way, but just make sure that is great. And maybe just great is like, hey, it's super simple and I know where to download the form. Cool. Easy. But every touch point needs to be looked at and interrogated. This is the core of human-centered design or creating great customer experiences, is that we look at a journey and we say, first of all, how can we remove the friction from it? Second is, where is the worst point? And that's where we want to put our effort in. And then once we've achieved something that's good, come up with a signature move. Do one thing that's spectacular. We're all sort of obsessed actually at the company with that recent little hospitality book. I don't know. I can't think of how to say his last name.
Is it the Ritz-Carlton one or?
No, it's not the Ritz-Carlton. He did 11 Madison Park. I'm kind of forgetting the name of the restaurant. Anyway, and it was featured in that TV show, The Bear. Like there's a really key scene where the guy's reading it. And he'll talk about that. And it's just like, yeah, we have to deliver what people need. They go to a nice restaurant, they want good food and clean plates and, good service and a wine that matches the steak and et cetera. And also a spectacular moment, something that, and I think that's this whole notion of like delivering the expected unexpectedly. That's part of customer experience. And those are the kinds of things where if you embrace every click as a wish, you start looking for those and you become like ravenous about them. Sometimes we talk about like, what's your signature move? And like, the one, because that's what gets talked about. It's like, oh my God, I had a really wonderful dinner and the wine and it was everything. And then they brought this dessert because they overheard that it's my anniversary or something like that, right? I didn't tell them that, but it just happened. Those are the things that we look for. And those are the things that really start to matter. And again, it's like, click, it's like locked in sort of the internet, sort of computer world. But like, if you take click and just say like everything that it's like they're wishing for something to happen and it's so satisfying when it actually comes through.
Absolutely. I also go take a look at one more lesson here. Think
Yeah.
like a challenger. You said you learned this from Julian Aldridge, the president and GM of Almo Marketing. How'd you learn this from Julian?
Yeah. Yeah, well, Julian. So Julian is, and he runs an agency called Enact right now. It kind of pulls this stuff through, and Julian told me a lot of things. He is he's very much a wild. He's like a free spirit in marketing, which I always really appreciated. He really embraced the challenger marketing idea. That was in, for example, Eat Big Fish or Embrace Your Constraints. And he would always bring that mentality to everything that we did. And sometimes we did have real challenger brands, small startups that were trying to take on a big competitor. Sometimes it was a big company that was already established. He would always take a moment to get us to think about being a challenger brand. And when, if you do a search on challenger brand, you go to like Eat Big Fish. There's a methodology for doing this. There's some steps and some structure and some strategy around that. But it did at least one of two things. One is it would spark ideas that we wouldn't have normally come up with. He had a really good trick, which I always love you, and every single brainstorm, which is, okay, round robin, go around the table, say an idea that'll get us fired. That's just what I did. It's so crazy, so bad. And just, let's really push that, because that's what disruptive, challenger brands will do. The other thing is sometimes it would occur to us that if it's a big brand, the established player, it would help us think about how that brand could be disrupted. How do we be protective against an upstart? And, you pick any company, any industry. I'm sitting here in San Francisco, California. I bet I could walk 3 blocks in any direction and find 4 people in a garage who are coming up with a technology that's going to disrupt your industry, right? And they're going to come to market in a really compelling, different way. Just, if we assume that position, it will push us to be either a little bit bolder, a little bit more consumer-centric, a little bit more inventive in the way in which we engage with people, or just be a bit more informed about what people are looking for. So always thinking like a challenger. Either you're going to do a challenger thing, or how you might be challenged. And sometimes it comes in really unexpected ways.
But then is there things that the leading brand should never do, right? Even if you're trying to think like a challenger. So I love that idea. We're Avis, we're number 2, we try harder. We always learn just the basics of brand positioning. Hey, Pepsi talks about Coke. Coke doesn't talk about Pepsi, right? So
that's right.
I like this idea. Hey, let's disrupt ourselves. Let's think about what might happen. But what should we do? I mean, if we are that leading brand, should we step back and say, hey, these are some creative ideas. They're off base for now because, again, we don't want to talk about Pepsi. We're Coke.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that idea of always be improving, always be seeking out the biggest idea possible. And that's the flip side, right? Is that when you're the big leader, and this is why I always thought, I'm generally speaking cool with billboards in Times Square and Super Bowl commercials, and these sorts of big moves that brands will make. That big brands will make, because if you're the leader, sometimes it makes sense to do the kind of thing that only a leader could do. Only a leader would do this thing because we're strong and bold. I mean, obviously there's marketing is littered with, moves that brands thought were challenging. Pepsi's protest. Who was it?
Kendall Jenner, was it?
Kendall Jenner. Yeah, I was trying to remember who it was. There's that, right? So, that somehow was clearly a misfire. But if you're in this, if you built a culture around biggest idea possible, you're always looking for that, and you're always trying to increase your confidence to do something bolder. And so you might be bold because this is your shot. There's the famous story of the guy who started FedEx, couldn't make payroll, so he took his last $100,000 and put it on red 7 on a roulette wheel, and it happened to come up, and now we have FedEx, right? Those are the kind of crazy risks. But sometimes you're in a position where creatively you have the opportunity to do that because you can make that move. Sometimes you're the bigger brand. You can say, well, we're well established and we've got enough insight and understanding of our market that we can do something that will continue keeping people engaged with us. They want to see leaders lead. And if you're Coke, just as I don't have any insight on them necessarily, they want to see Coke do something. They did this really beautiful ad. This is now 10 years ago, but the Happiness Factory, right? This really wonderfully rich ad where, you put a quarter into a machine and what happens at a Coke machine. I think it was a Lyman Kennedy spot. I'm pretty sure it was. And it was rich and organized and it didn't say anything about the product. It was just beautiful. and it was compelling. Apple now, maybe it's in other cities in San Francisco, has these big billboards, these beautiful, gigantic portraits of babies. Okay, Apple can do that because they're Apple, right? And a smaller company wouldn't necessarily have the ability to do that because maybe they need to communicate features or whatever. But it's like we want to see leaders lead, and when leaders do that, we're impressed by it freshly.
Absolutely. Well, Gary, we talked about so many different things about what it means to be a marketer. If you had to break it down, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
I think the key. So I think that there's a really good. This is what has always kept me in marketing. It's this idea that we have to firmly believe that art can solve business problems. And it's a really weird idea, and it doesn't even seem to make any sense, but we do believe it. If you need more market share, if you need whatever, like a true business problem. And I see a lot of things that are out there, a lot of people and whatever, like that either believe one or the other. They either want to make art or they want to do business problems, right? And there's a very few people who believe you can blend both of those together. And you have to keep on maintaining that. There's a debate that always happens, like, it's the business side is killing the creative, or the creative side doesn't pay attention to the business, and that's such a stagnating idea. It only really works. It's only advertising. It's only marketing if it's both, and finding both is so elusive that a good marketer is addicted to the chase. And so one of the things I've had an opportunity, I really enjoy doing some mentoring with people, through the 4As or through various programs. And one of the things I always wrap it up, and I said is, if nothing else, you take nothing else away, advertising or marketing, but in general, it has to have the 3 M's. And I don't think we're doing visuals, but I'm holding up my 3 fingers and it makes an M. And it has to be meaningful, memorable, and motivating. So meaningful, it has to communicate something about the product or the brand or whatever it might be. It has to be memorable. It has to have something that just solidifies in your brain, in the consumer's brain, that they can recall. And motivating, it has to get them to take an action or believe something. If it doesn't have all 3 of those things, it's not marketing. It's something else. It might be beautiful, it might be funny, it might be cool, it might be whatever. But the only way it's marketing is if it has all 3 of those things. So the cool thing about marketing is that people come to it from all different paths. Like I said, I studied books. If you get to a point where you're obsessed on finding the intersection of those 3 things, that's a good marketer.
All right, we got the 4 Ps and we got the 3 Ms. Did you come up with that? I've never heard that before. Is that yours?
I did come up with the 3 Ms. I was probably sitting in a bar one night drinking bourbon and came up with 3 M's. I don't know, something like that. But yeah, that's a me.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Well,
there you go.
Well, I really like that, Gary. Art can solve business problems. So thank you so much for sharing your art with us today, your career as an artist solving business problems. Thank you so much.
Well, it was really nice to make a connection with you. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share what's on my mind with you and your audience.
And thank you all to you for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.